Addiction never affects just the addict. It affects all of us. Recovering from addiction and alcoholism is also a life-changing battle for families dealing with a loved one's addiction. Numerous programs support addicts as they reclaim their lives, while their families face their own challenges without the same guidance. You're listening to Voices in Courage with KL Wells, where we transform the lives of the families and loved ones of addicts and alcoholics from surviving to thriving in the midst of chaos. Tune in as we highlight vulnerable stories of families who have addicted relatives and friends and learn how they have dealt with the challenges of isolation, desperation, and shame. If you are seeking ways to live your best life, then we welcome you into this safe space. Be a part of change today with your host, KL Wells.
So I'm super excited because what I believe is that this is an unending journey. It's an unfolding for all of us. And, I know in my own journey that where I was 6 months ago is different than where I am today. And where I was a year ago was different than where I was 6 months ago. And so that's why talking to you both today is so valuable, because your journey has been in so many ways pretty quick in the last couple years. And as individuals, as a couple, as a family, and then as a generational component to all of this too. And so to visit today about the generational healing, the larger family healing, and what's kind of taken place, where were you previously to where you are today, and actually what did take place to make the changes happen. Again, I believe gives hope and promise for those who are stuck in these places where they just don't know if that's possible. Mm-hmm. And there's no guarantees. It's just who we are and how we show up, and can we show up with people who potentially are open to an evolution in the change in relationships. So Tucker and Jenn, I'm going to turn it over to the two of you to speak to your journey.
Well, thank you for that introduction in the sense of a starting point, because there's probably a million places where we can start. I won't speak on behalf of Jen, but what I will say is those first, let's just call them 5 years, phase one, go by very, very slowly, in the sense that we've talked about this in the past, where it's like, okay, get sober, everything's great. It's not that way, but I will attest from my perspective, the moment things do start to click, it accelerates so much faster than we anticipated, which is so hopeful and so exciting. Is the moment the entire family's on the same page, where both mom and dad specifically have done their part and really invested the work, have learned the new dance, have really just owned emotional intelligence in a way that we probably somewhat forced into, but also one of my greatest blessings out of all of this was the emotional intelligence gained from it.
Yeah.
I was probably suffering from that for so long. But I would say the greatest observation for me is the acceleration of the happiness and the coming back together again today. So I think that's what I'm excited to share. Jen?
Yeah, I would say for me, one of the reasons why I wanted to speak today with you again, KL, was because you don't realize the thickness of the cloud that you're in, of a storm, until it starts to clear up a little bit, and then a little bit more. And then once you feel like your storm is actually completely cleared up and you start to become a fully functioning family again, you realize how big of a storm it was at some point, and then that there were still some gray areas of clouds that we've been working through. But then once you get through the whole storm, and then you look back and you're like, wow, what just happened? And then where we are now, it's such a gift. It's such a blessing that we're so afraid that we don't want it to because we worked so hard to get here.
Yeah.
In the clarity and thinking, I think, is one of the biggest things that I wanted to bring up, because I thought, I was clear a year or two ago, and even more so just giving it time, giving it healing, the clarity of thinking for me as an individual, and seeing the difference from a healthy family that's functioning versus where we were before. You can't really see if you're functioning well or not because you're in the thick of it. Right. And so that's kind of why I wanted to speak on it, because when you finally get out of it, you see the gifts that have been given and all the things that you have learned from it, and how humbling it is as an individual and as a family unit, to say, this is where we were and this is where we are now. And how attitude that you hold is overwhelming.
Yeah. And I'm sure each of you would have a little different perspective on this, but can you give the comparative contrast, like a story that represents the past and now a story that highlights the healing that you're speaking to, Jenn? And then we'll visit what's the bridge. Yes.
So I'm going to start with the positive, the recent. So I made Tucker breakfast in bed on Saturday, and that was probably the first time I don't know if it's ever been done, but I've made way back when we were in a honeymoon period. But I made Tucker breakfast in bed on Saturday because he's been busting his butt for our family as a father. Yeah. And I recognize that. And it took some time for me to, didn't take time to recognize it, but for me to fully embrace that this is a different person than who we had 5 or 7 years ago. And I find the way that I hold him in my mind and in my heart has completely changed. It's the way that it was initially when we first got married, but it's also a little bit different just because of the way that life has happened. But it's the recognition of, wow, look how far you've come. I'm so proud of you, saying the words of affirmation. Is it the 5 love languages that we talked about? And knowing his love language, words of affirmation is what he needs. And, bringing him that bagel and cup of coffee was like bringing it was a big deal, I think, for him. And then saying to our children, when we went to dinner the other night, your father just landed XYZ, client or account. How proud are we of him? Let's choose that. So coming together as a unit, as a family, and recognizing and learning the love languages that are needed, versus before where, we were giving each other apples and oranges. He was, making home videos while I was working, and I just needed somebody to help with a carpool or with the dishes or make a meal. But he wasn't capable of doing that. I remember saying that in our last interview with you. And so, that's where we were before. And now the way he's showing up now to his family, and the importance of recognizing it for your loved one. And again, this isn't just about alcoholism. This is just about marriage. This is about, about life. Right. And so that's how different we showed up for each other before, which was apples versus oranges, and then resentment, anger, frustration, passing each other the night, versus now recognition, love, awareness, that kind of way. I guess it would be my best way of saying it. Tucker, is that accurate for you?
I think that's very accurate. And yes, I did have to pinch myself Saturday morning. Am I still in my REM sleep, or is this actually happening?
I think it wasn't that great, but it was it was the thought that counted.
It was oh my gosh, something's working. It was just a small gesture. And she's right. I think words of affirmation is my love language. And I think when I look back and realize that words were such weapons over so many years, that I literally realized that my love language was being extinguished. And even my own self-talk. I mean, it's that failure, that all of that goes with it. So I was blown away by the gesture, but it also felt like reassurance to me that we were both headed in the right direction. And it wasn't just about, me feeling good. It was seeing her feel that trust being built back. And who would have known that a bagel and coffee would such a powerful gesture. Now, Jenn can literally remember what I was wearing on September 1st, 1999. But I think things more conceptually. So my recollection of answering your question is going to be a little bit more conceptual. But what I'm noticing in the past, sitting down and trying to have a conversation, it was trying to one up the other, or I would always get defensive and turn everything into an argument, or whatever that might feel like, right? So words, again, we're being used,
weaponized.
And the therapy that we've been working on is understanding respect, validation, and being able to sit down and have a conversation that is more focused on how do we come to a meeting of the minds versus how am I going to create my army over here? How am I going to create my army over here? And how are they going to meet on the battlefield? It's a completely different experience. Even if we don't agree with the other person, or we have a different opinion, to be able to sit down and collectively, without anger, without raising of voices or whatever it is, it's more of a calming kind of a thing. We didn't have conversations like that. And most of my friends that are talking about certain things have that same conversation where it's like, it's this, it's this, it's this. And it's kind of like, you can sit back and say, it's this and it's this, but it's also this. And that has not been apparent for us for quite some time. So, those words of affirmation, acts of service, like, Jenn did, that was a big deal. So that's kind of where my mind immediately went to, was literally the power of words. The power of conversation can change everything. Healthy conversation.
Right. What are you thinking, Jenn?
I don't really have much to say, on that. I agree with him. I mean, I think that there's so much that's happened. And I think that there's an additional piece of it where your perspective has to change in a healthy way. I said the words in our last interview. I said, I've had a lot of things happen to me, and I didn't pick up on that then. And I'm picking up on it now. Everybody has stuff that happens, but when you're in that quote victim role of this has happened to me, it's easy to sit in that pile and just sit there and just feel sorry for yourself. Well, this has happened to me. Well, okay, everybody's had stuff happen to them. So what are you going to do about it? And so you just get up and you pick yourself up out of that pile, and you don't sit back down in that pile of pity. You move along, and then you try not to say that again. And you change your perspective, and then you take the lessons. I think for me, it's the most valuable lessons that I have learned. As much it was not fun to go through these trenches, because it was tough. Like I've said before, God's not going to give you something that you can't handle. But there were moments where I was like, this is plenty. But when you change your perspective, it actually empowers you. You become more powerful in your own mind and body and spirit, and in your own words. And then you start to do, for lack of a better word, greater things. Not like I'm necessarily changing the world, but within myself, in the way that I show up to the world, in the way that I present myself, and the way that I function in the family. That's completely changing. And when you go about it, there has to be a humility piece to it. You don't have to be the strongest person in the room or the loudest person in the room. What I'm learning is that it's very good sometimes to be quiet and listen, because you're going to pick up on so much more by observation. And then when you do speak, people will actually listen to you more, because you've been observing, and you don't have to be, again, the loudest voice. And being okay with not being the strongest, but working towards that. So yes, you have stuff happen to you, okay, but pick yourself up and then try and start moving forward with what you can, and feeling worthy of it. That's the other thing too, is it's the perspective change, the humility, knowing that you're worthy to be strong again, be powerful again, have the best relationship that you want to have for yourself, and the kind that you are deserving for yourself, but also how you show up to others in a respectful way. I think those are all massive perspective changes for me, and changes in the last year and a half.
Yeah. And this may be premature, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Do you think do you guys both think, or individually think, that this is one of the gifts that's been embedded in this journey of addiction, alcoholism, this higher level of being able to be humble, to listen, to change your perspective, to observe, to be present in a more powerful way?
Yes, because we went to a football game on Friday, and we observed various interactions and ways people moved about. And, you know, we saw some of our old ways maybe, and we kind of laughed and chuckled quietly to ourselves. But then we also, you just learn things about yourself, that how you want to show up to people and how you want to show up to the world. The way you make other people feel, I think, is one of the most important and impactful ways you can move about in this world. So like I said, you don't have to be the loudest, the strongest, the best, the brightest, but the way that you make people feel when you speak with them, and the way that you leave with them and how you present yourself to them, I think is far more impactful than having a resume that's this long.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm assuming, but I'm going to ask the question anyway, that there's a whole lot more intentionality about how you show up now.
Absolutely.
A lot more self-awareness. Like I said, I used to be the loudest one. Sometimes am.
Used to be?
Right?
Used to be?
Yes. With my family on NFL Sundays, I am the loudest person in the room, and that's what it's going to be. We're in the privacy of our home. But yes, there's intentionality of how I move about in the space, how I present myself. There's intentionality in words and actions and interactions.
And so is there an intentionality about how you want to show up for others and how you would like their experience to be with you?
Tucker, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because our whole friend group has changed. The dynamics of past relationships has changed. We've both recognized and made an intentional decision to focus on relationships and friendships that see a reciprocal support versus it being one-sided. And what she was referring to at the football game, you just never know. I think for me too, I spent so many years in fear of how I was perceived.
Yeah.
That my defense came out as mean. It came out as harsh. It came out as short, terse, angry. And that didn't know it at the time, definitely a defense mechanism. And unfortunately, the family is the one that has to see all of that nastiness. But the moment that you move through it and accept what's happened and become the person it sounds cliche, the person that you really want to show up as, all of those fears subside. And all of those feelings of anger and dismissiveness just start to fall away in a way that I wasn't expecting, I guess. I've talked about this in the past, where it's that scarlet letter, right? The moment that you remove the scarlet letter and own it as a badge of courage, that changes the way you show up immensely.
Right.
You start to not care what people judge you as. It's the reflection of them. That's the mirror. So I think one of the things that Jen and I we've accepted is how we show up to one another. There's no judgment anymore. There's no, you're this, you're that, this. It's who we are. Jen made a comment. What was that, Jen? Maybe 3 months ago or so. It's the one where this is life. We are who we are. Can we just accept it and enjoy it, kind of a thing? And I don't know if you recall what I'm talking about. It's a conversation you had with me that really stuck, and it really just made me stop trying to perfect, change, or whatever it was. It's like, just show up as who you are.
Yes, I remember that conversation.
Yeah, and I'm having trouble articulating, but it was one of those moments where I'm like, oh my God, she spoke to me in a way that I don't think we've connected before. And it was not judging one another, but not judging our situation, realizing this is what it is. So let's have fun with it. And that was kind of a moment of clarity for both of us. But yeah, that's what came to mind.
Yeah. So can you kind of pinpoint a couple, 3 things that each one of you have done along the way to go from where you were to where you are now?
Yes, I would say just in general. I think one thing that we learned for both of us that we that I try and make sure that I do every time, and I don't get it right every time, but I practice it, and I want us both to be doing this for each other, is if we've done something that hurts the other person, even our own kids, if we say something wrong, it's not sorry you feel that way. It's I'm sorry that my words and actions made you feel sad or made you feel angry. I'm responsible for the way that I made you feel, and I will try to never do that again. So it's not placing the sorry you feel that way, like not taking responsibility for the action that I did. Because everybody's gonna do it, but like, and I say this to my kids because we have teenagers, so mom makes mistakes all the time. So I say this basically on a daily basis now at this point. But I say, I'm sorry that the way that I said that made you feel whatever emotion it is, anger, sadness, frustration, whatever. It is my responsibility to try and not do that. It's to not do that again. I gave you my promise that I will work very hard to make sure that I don't do that again. And it has to be genuine because I'm a human being. So, I'm going to stop again. So I'm not going to get it right every time, kids, but that's how and that's how I hope. And I say that I'm trying to model for our kids how we'd like to talk to other people and how to be responsible for our own actions and words. So I want us to show up like that as a married couple for each other. That's how I'd like to be treated. So it's kind of like the golden rules show about how you'd like to treat others the way you'd like to be treated. That's how I'd like to be treated. I don't want to be dismissed for something that may have hurt me. So I try and walk the walk that we've learned. The other thing is that in going through all of this, in all seriousness, I feel like it was a bad dream. Like because we're in such a different spot, and we're not in a perfect spot, but because there has been a flip of the coin, I almost feel like that decade was a bad dream. And so then some guilt has been coming up. Oh, how could you have thought of not staying together? And I've worked through with my doctor. No, that really happened.
Yeah.
So feeling that way in that moment, that's normal, thoughts. And that's a normal response to something that's very scary, or a normal response to something that is not right. And so acceptance that did happen. And also acceptance that there were signs before, but when you love someone so much, you don't want to see it. So acceptance that there was a sign and signs many years prior, but I just didn't want to accept it and face it. And then it just naturally, did the course. So with the clarity that I'm having now, I realize that, there were signs. Being honest with yourself that it's okay to be honest with yourself, even with things that become anew that you don't want to feel because you're afraid to feel it. It's okay to feel it, even if it scares you. Feel it, like you talk about in your 5 acts of courage. Feel it, walk through the emotions, and then it kind of takes its power away. Those are, I think, be the main couple things that I've learned about the apologies and the recognizing the past versus the present, and then walking through the emotions are the 3 that I would say would be mine.
Yeah, and what I do also appreciate about, what you're talking about is it's the persistence and courage to continue to lean in to understanding your own journey and the journey with Tucker and the kids. It's continually kind of rewriting the story. And so I do believe that takes resiliency, that takes persistence, that takes courage. And to recognize that is present in this journey. And you have chosen intentionally to do this. And once you set that that way of being in motion, then you will continue to unpack and unfold and all the things that go with that. And so, 6 months from now, you're going to be in another different place, because you can't put your foot in the same place in the river every time.
No. And I recall a conversation he's talking about, because what I basically said to him was, it was when we were going through a bump. And I said to him very plainly and clearly, I can handle this.
Mm-hmm.
I just need you to show up authentically so we can figure out what it is. And then we can walk through it together. And so like giving him the confidence, I can handle this. I'm going to be here, but I need X from you, being very direct. I need you to show up authentically so we can get to the root of whatever it is, so we can just get through this bump. So having that, again, unconditional showing up for each other, the trust for him to know that I would still be there as we unpack what we had to unpack at that moment.
Right.
I think, is that how you recall it, Tucker?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to pinpoint your ability to clearly and concisely communicate your truth. Because so many people in communications walk around thinking, well, they know what I'm thinking. And, if for a number of years, I would say to Patty, I cannot read your mind. So please drop the expectation. Yeah. So I'm asking for clarification, because we don't think about things the same. So help me understand, what's in your heart, what's in your soul, what's in your mind. So I can at least know. And then out of that space, then I can show up and meet you.
Right.
So that's what I'm hearing in this story that you're telling, Jen. Yeah. So very cool. Tucker?
I think for me, Jen knows that I'm also a metaphorical speaker when it comes to these things, because I'm conceptual that way. But one of the things that it's a mindset thing for me, and pinpointing. And even when someone says, "What's your sobriety date?" I don't even say that. I say it's my release date, because it's that release from that self-imposed prison kind of a thing. I think for me, as you're going through life, and it felt like this huge valley. What's really cool is to kind of back up and actually see it as a huge peak. Because yes, there were some really dark times. The cool thing of it, I call it collateral beauty, is that out of all of this came something pretty significant. So as we do this, you climb out much stronger. And I do think that we've both learned life lessons that we would not have learned had we not gone through this.
Right.
And so there's the blessings that way, and said this time and time again, those get mirrored and passed on. So that's always a great thing. The other thing that I would say too is pinpointing the idea, this is not a one and done. It's not an experiment. It has to become part of your DNA.
Right.
And I think what's really cool is the more we've practiced, the more we've engaged in this and invested in it, whatever it was, it's cool to wake up in the morning and feel like it's now becoming part of our DNA of a trial and error. Because the trial and error can get old real quick. It can be frustrating. It can still be finger pointing. It can be this and that. And all it does is recall the past. But when it starts to become part of your day-to-day DNA, there's something really, really powerful about that. And it is, and Jen's right. The moment either one of us makes a mistake, says something wrong, in the past, I've never wanted to be the person that says, that's on me. It actually feels really good to say, you know what? I was wrong. Wrong choice of words. I'm sorry that my actions have caused you hurt. That's not fair. And all of a sudden, it just kind of like, well, that was easy. Like, why
you know what I say? I say, cool, let's go. And that's it. And so, but he kind of does the same thing. It's cool.
It doesn't fester. It doesn't linger.
Right.
It used to loiter around like, a bad, I don't know, whatever. Yeah. And now it's like, okay, it needs to just kick it, like move on.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Tucker.
No, I was just going to say, I think those are the two things that stand out. And there's, the more you talk about it, I think that's, I would say the third thing is what used to be very shameful. It's like, oh, we can't talk about that. Now it's like, sometimes it comes out of my mouth. I'm like, oh, that might someone else, that might be kind of traumatic.
Yeah, this is kind of what we talk about all the time. So like we figure like,
it's like
this, and then when you're at a dinner conversation with people and you talk about that, you're like, oh, maybe they don't talk like this.
Yeah, right.
Well, that too, and it's like,
I
remember having to go, to the bar ahead of time if we were meeting with friends and saying, can you give me, club soda with a lime in a short glass so it looked like an alcoholic beverage, and I would bring that to the table because I wanted to carry on the facade that it's the way it's always been. And now it's like, give me a Diet Coke, and if someone says, oh, you're not drinking, I'm like, nope, I gave it up years ago. Best thing I ever did.
Yeah.
It just kind of flows like this, and it's freeing. But it's not for everyone that sense. But for us, it's a sign that we've done the work. It's working, and we're also helping change the narrative for how all of this is shared with others, because that to me is what's going to make families heal.
Right. Yeah. And so I think about number one, owning our actions is a sign of the piece that you spoke to was the practice, that you just don't stop something. You actually have to lean into creating something new, and then you have to practice it so that it rewires your neural pathways in your brain. So it just then becomes, oh, this is how we do this now. If I say something and I get a response that isn't quite what I wanted or intended, I'm going to own what I just said, and then we're going to come at it anew. And so what I want our audience to hear is intentionality and rethinking. And instead of stopping, it's actually figuring out who I want to be in that situation. And then practice has to occur in order to embrace this new way of being in the world. And then it settles into comfort and freedom and the dropping of the shame, the stigma, the judgment for ourselves.
Yeah, I think there's a lightness that we haven't experienced in a long time. And I think even now when, my beasts start to recur in terms of, financial, whatever it is, and, fear here and all this kind of stuff. I know now that I can actually go to Jen and share that. Whereas before it was shameful and I would bury it, and then there go the symptoms again, and so I think now one of the best antidotes is the honesty and the conversation, which is what marriage should be built on. But we're humans, and sometimes I'll be the first one to admit that when our brain isn't working the right way, things happen.
That stuff can get lost in the disease and over time in a marriage with just naturally. The thing that I wanted to bring up before we run out of time is codependency. I didn't know what it was, didn't see it in myself. And I know, sometimes people say it a little bit differently, but what I recognize now is like I've said in the prior interview, the 2 years after he got sober were the two of the loneliest, because it's like the person that you loved is still here. They're still living here in your house, but you don't recognize them whatsoever.
Right.
The personality, the way they show up to you, the way they show up for themselves. And so that was lonely, because what I had done prior to all this is I had become dependent upon our relationship, eating dinner together, going rollerblading, going to movies, anything that we did together. So it was dependent upon us always going, we were this. And I lost myself as an individual over time, even prior, I would say, to us being married, because we were so codependent upon seeing each other constantly and being with each other. And so what I had to do in those years, it was, like I said, the two loneliest years of this disease that I have ever experienced. But it was the time that gave me the time, the forced me, frankly, to take the time and recognize that I had to develop as an individual again. And I had to redevelop my morals and stick with them and remind myself of the path of the gut, heart, mind, body, where I wanted to go, redo my path and take some stuff from the past that I did want to keep and then leave the rest behind, and then create this new path for myself as an individual. And so there were lonely nights. I mean, there were lonely nights, there were lonely days. And you get to know yourself again, and taking that time and being willing to kind of accept that this is what it is right now. It's not always going to be lonely, but this is what it is now. And then you develop more interest, more thought patterns and things that you know about yourself. And then you start to enjoy who you are as a person again. You start to become proud of who you are as a person. And then you come back in the marriage, like we did after 2 years, as two very completely different people. You're almost reintroducing yourselves to each other, and then seeing, can we dance together again? Because you have to make a choice, like the therapist said, sure to get off the pot. So we said, okay, we're going to go and we're going to figure this out. But it didn't happen, like Tucker said, it didn't happen overnight. But I think learning to become an individual with my own thoughts and feelings, and knowing that I'm worthy of so much more than I thought that I was a huge game changer for me, because I'm much more independent now. And I'm trying to show that to our children, because that's just something that I stumbled and fell with, and I had to learn the hard way. And so you try and give your kids like a map book of, okay, this is what I love when I do things wrong, because I run and tell the kids right away, I just messed up. This is what I learned from it. I like telling them that more almost than telling them about my successes, because who cares? Okay, so you did that, great. But it's up and I get, your fingers get dirty. Like, let me tell you about something that I did wrong, so you don't ever do what I do. I mean, you might just think, but you become so much more comfortable in your skin, and you're not a part. Yes, I'm a part of two, but I'm so happy just being myself and who that I am now. I think as a better wife and mother because of that.
I just think that's so powerful, Jen. For me, it is so much a gift of this disease, because most people married and parents with kids, they are enmeshed. And they lose themselves in the midst of it. And, this whole notion, I mean, I'm the parent of a recovering addict. And so the job description that a lot of parents take on is, I have to fix them. I have to control this. I have to do all that. And no, it's exactly what you just spoke to, is I have to do my work. So if in fact he pops out the other side, I am the happiest, the thriving, the most centered whole person I can be to welcome him home. And wow, that is just like, whoop, for a lot of people, they're like, you have lost your mind. Children will write to their parents once they're on the other side of it. It is exactly what you just said, is this is my journey. You can't fix it. You can't cure it. You can't control it. Let me have my journey. And I may not, quote, survive. But you need to do your work in the meantime, so that you are there happy and whole and joyful and all the things when and if I pop out the other side. So yeah, really powerful, really powerful. So Tucker, what are you thinking, based on this conversation?
I think it's pretty somewhat of an oxymoron to sit here and smile looking back on the hell that it was. But I was just reflecting, and I literally lost myself as you guys were talking, because I was remembering some of the times that I was most shameful about. And now I'm remembering the times that we can laugh, that we can joke about, things that most people will be like, I can't believe that it happened to you. And now Jen just kind of chuckle at it and be like, yeah, it did. But it doesn't define us. What does define us is the laughter and, the reconnection and all of the things that we went through, as horrible as they were, it makes me feel so much more excited about the next 25 years. I mean, we've been together 25 years.
Yeah.
It just makes the next 25 feel that much more rewarding, because we're not going through it at 50, 60, 70 years of age.
Right.
We got it in our midlife awakening, not our midlife crisis. And we're going to be able to soar into the future of retirement on this little house on a lake that we've been imagining for a long time, wherever the hell that may be, with whatever money we may make. But at least there's the vision, because just a few short years ago, there wasn't even a vision.
Right.
Get through the day.
Yeah.
And now the vision is, what can we do for an eternity? So that's a pretty cool realization.
Yeah. Woo. Well, congratulations. This isn't for wimps.
Yeah. And there's just one image I kind of want to leave for the, whether it's a spouse or a parent or whatever, but we were on our vacation this summer, and I reached out to hold Tucker's hand, and we haven't held hands for years. And you don't just go back to hand holding and doing all the stuff, because it's going to take some time. And it was weird at first, but we're getting our rhythm back. And the kids and they go, Mom and Dad are holding hands. Like, what the hell's going on? And so, then we came back from our trip, and, we went to the movies and held hands again. So it comes back in time, but you have to have the courage and the open heart and willingness to,
Yes.
I was so timid and afraid to hold hands before, because you get hurt, so why are you going to go hold hands with someone who may have hurt you a while back and maybe not trust you, but have the courage and be brave enough to just put your hand out. And hold the hand of, whether it's your child or your spouse or whatever. And my biggest accomplishment, I've said this to the kids, because our son is about to go to college, and we've said to them, we didn't accomplish all that we wanted to provide for you because we hit a bump. We had a big bump. But I hope that that even though we don't have the biggest house in the block and we don't have XYZ, what we thought and we would be able to provide, we hope that you live in a home of so much love. And I hope that you've seen us, frankly, like, battle through this, and know that whatever you encounter in life, you can get through it. And my greatest accomplishment when I pass away, and, hopefully I get to go to heaven, and, when I meet, whatever, I feel like I'm going to say my biggest accomplishment is that I kept my family together.
Yeah.
Messy. And it, wasn't what I expected, but my biggest accomplishment when our kids go to college or whenever my time is up is that I kept us together, and, fight for that person, fight for yourself, fight for your family, fight for those relationships. That hand holding moment is possible for everybody.
Yeah.
That's the best place to leave it on.
Yeah, absolutely. So well said, Jenn.
Thank you for joining us in this episode. We hope this discussion gives you the empowerment you need during these challenging times. Remember, there is always light after darkness. For more inspiring conversations like this one, subscribe to the show at voicesencourage.com/podcast. We encourage you to share with your friends and family going through similar situations, so we can continue to build a strong community of hope and possibility. Start your life-changing journey today. Join our community at voicesencourage.com.